Finally, a panel that looks like we are at FT or Soccerex or... Yeah, we're the odd ones out today, and we put you in between myself and Polly, so welcome. Today we're going to talk about what makes you great male allies and how you are contributing to the growth of women's football. And instead of me introducing you, I'm actually going to ask each of you to quickly introduce yourself and tell how you relate to this topic of being a male ally for women's football. My dear Maheta is the CEO of PFA, where I serve as an INED, so we get to collaborate a lot. Over to you. Let's start with you.
I'm on the spot right from the beginning.
Yes, of course.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Well, as you were saying, I'm Maheta Molango. I joined the PFA about 18 months ago to become the new chief exec of the organization. And I think for me, it's a personal commitment to try to focus on talent, you know, and to make sure that you support people who are talented, and that you actually focus on women football, and you find a space for women football within the PFA with a bespoke approach to what we try to achieve. And as I said, the focus on getting the best people the opportunity irrespective of what they do and where they come from. And I think I'm probably an example of that, no? So I'm a great believer in that philosophy.
Thank you. And Alan, for our sins, we're both ex-investment bankers who fell in love with the game. And so over to you.
So Alan Pace, chairman of Burnley Football Club. About 2.5 years ago, myself and a group of my colleagues acquired Burnley Football Club during the pandemic, the first Premier League team to be acquired for quite some time, and also during the pandemic was an interesting challenge by itself. I'm the father of 3 girls, all mad footballers, and have driven me very significantly to my views on kind of what we should be doing in a lot of different aspects. So where I've come from on this is that, I've had the experience of working with sports as well as with banking, and we talk a lot about a lot of topics that are important to you and to me from a diversity and other things, but we do very little actually, putting our money where our mouths are and actually doing it ourselves. So one of the reasons for coming and acquiring a football club in the UK was we think sport can be done differently here. Yes, we bring an American attitude towards that, but it wouldn't surprise a lot of people that has a lot to do with the women's game and things and how things can be different. But if you're not willing to invest, you're not going to make the change. So.
Agreed.
Over to Dion, who told me about his lovely experience at Galatasaray's Ali Sami and Hell in '94. Last time he was there playing against us.
Yes, welcome to hell. That was the welcome. It was great. My name's Dion Dublin, played football for 22 years as a professional. I now walk around 2 up and 2 downs in Stoke. Trying to find damp and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know how to explain this, because when I was in Leicester, I was born in Leicester. I was playing football from the age of 8, and I had a difficult, but I had a pathway where I could go and try and achieve under 11s, under 12s, 13s, all the way up to 15s at Leicester, and then non-league football, playing for pubs, playing for the White Horse, playing for the Dog and Gun. I just did everything in order to try and achieve where I wanted to get to, but I had the chance and I had those pathways, and having been around a lot of girls and sisters and friends of sisters, and they all used to come and watch me play, and there was never anything at all for them, no way of them playing in the same team even. So there was nothing there. So now we've come this far, we just have to keep nudging, and I just want to be part of that. Keep nudging it to where it needs to be, where we need to get it to.
Wonderful. And Tom, you met this morning, but nevertheless, let's hear from him again.
Yeah, Tom Corbett from Barclays. I mean, you did hear from me this morning. I believe, Barclays as well, my employer believes very passionately in making football available for everyone. And that's why, we're doing what we're doing. And I've just been inspired by lots of people as we've been on this journey. One of them actually was here last year, I think, and did a keynote, which was Kelly Smith. And to hear someone like Kelly Smith talk about her history and journey through the game, and having to wear a wig or pretend to be a boy and change her name and get chased out of clubs and eventually leave the country. That's something that I never want my daughters to experience or go through if football's the course that they choose. And that's why I'm so passionate about what we're all trying to do.
Thank you. And Polly.
Yeah, not a male, but but I suppose my first male ally was my dad. It's actually my mum told my dad to go and get his coaching qualification so that he could set up a team for me and my friends to play in Nottingham. So he was the biggest champion of me starting out in football. I'm now head of women's football at Manchester United. I've worked at Brighton and Hove Albion, I've worked at UEFA, I've worked at the FA and County FA, so very fortunate to have had a full career in football and to have seen the women's game grow in parallel to that. So, huge thanks to him and my mum really for pushing my dad into doing those courses. I'm very fortunate to have worked with plenty of men along the way that continue to champion me and the women's game, so very fortunate.
Well, you've been around the women's game for a very long time, and what big changes have you seen throughout this period?
I think my earliest memory, other than playing football, was in '92. I went to go and watch the England women's team play, and they weren't called the Lionesses then; they were the England women's football team, and they were playing at the City Ground in Nottingham. And it was my birthday, and I asked if we could go along. So parents agreed, took a group of my friends and my football team. I was so excited to go. But on the way to the ground, I thought, something feels a bit different. There weren't many cars on the road. We could park close to the ground. The normal burger van wasn't there that would have been there for Forest matches. And as a season ticket holder for Forest, I was used to the hustle and bustle around match day. So we got parked up really close, and I was thinking, have we got the wrong day? Have we got something wrong here? No, managed to, got through the turnstiles, and there was nobody there. It's about 50 people in the ground. Anyway, we got match programme, which was 2 sheets of blue A4 paper stapled together. I was like, this isn't what I was expecting. The players were in, men's fit baggy shirts, and the atmosphere was dreadful. Just, what a disappointment. I was almost embarrassed in front of all of my friends that I'd taken them to this match that was meant to be my birthday party to celebrate and have a good day out. And I think it was one of the first matches that I've ever left before before full time, sorry. It was cold, it was wet, it's just a real letdown. And I left thinking, I was cross. I left thinking, I usually go on every other Saturday to, 30,000 people, great atmosphere, watching a really competitive game. And this experience watching the England women's national team was just nowhere near what I was used to. I was disappointed, I was embarrassed at the difference of my experiences. So I think leaving that, just feeling cross about the different standards and the different experiences that I was facing, I think really is something hit hard that day to think I need to work, or I want to work to try and address the experiences, because I came away thinking there's no future in the professional game for women, there's no future for me, let alone playing, but there's just women's football was nowhere to be seen. So I think comparing that experience in '92 as a young girl to what we were able to witness this summer, just totally different, in many facets. So I think that comparison in 21 years, we've come a long way. So hopefully no 8-year-olds will have to go back and experience what I did on that cold, wet November day in front of with only 50 people there.
It's actually 31 years.
Oh gosh, yeah.
That's even, more striking. So.
Yeah.
You okay?
Yeah, all good. Good point, well made. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Maheta, what are we doing as PFA to help with that, contribute to that big change that's happening in the women's football?
I think we try to go in 3 different directions. The first one is to try to drive change from the top, from the ball. Ultimately, if you always have the same people on that board, you always get to the same outcome. So I think for us, it was important to get the board composition right. And from that perspective, what we did is have a players board whereby we have 2 representatives per category. So the WSL has exactly the same number of reps as the Premier League. And that was important for us to start from the top where really you change that board composition. Second, I think it was a question of having a bespoke approach to women's football and have a proper department led by Mary and Fern, who I think are somewhere here, who are doing a fantastic job for us to really have that bespoke approach to what women's football requires. And I think the last bit was to actually implement those ideas. No? And I think the example of the meeting that we had with the president of FIFA back in January last year, where we spoke about the calendar, was a good example of that, where you could see a Lucy Bronze and a Steph Houghton sitting next to Fernandinho, Maguire and Pogba, to have basically both male and female players in that important meeting explaining what they felt about the calendar. So for us, we want to build those bridges because we found that a lot of time the best allies are those male players in the same club who are not even aware of the difficulties that the female counterpart are going through. So that's, I think, the approach. It's not easy, as you know, it's a challenge, but I think we are heading in the right direction, or hope to be in the right direction.
In our new PFA, which is more player-centric, obviously female players play a very important role in the whole strategy. So over to Tom. We know Barclays is heavily investing in women's football, but not only at the top, also at grassroots level as well. Why is that? Can you explain to us a little bit the whole strategy as well?
Yeah, I can do. I can give you the off the record, then the on the record. I think Margena's in here somewhere from the FA. I don't know where she is, and you've got Kelly Simmons coming tomorrow. They, about 6 years ago, took me out to watch some cricket, and it rained all day. We saw no cricket, but we drank a lot of gin. And they got me. There's a reason why they took me to the cricket. I think it's exactly what Polly was talking about, because the football stadiums were so average then. There was no way they were going to take me to watch a football game. Anyway, they got me so pissed, and then I got up in the morning and we'd done the deal. So that was how that was how we got into it. No, please, nobody put that on social media, so I shan't have a job tomorrow. No, that's not the reason why. I met people like Kelly, like Margena, like Sue Campbell, who inspired us to get involved in the game. We'd had a 20-year history in the men's game for very good reasons, and we're still involved, heavily involved in the men's game. But back in 2018, or just before that, when the Women's Super League started to go professional, we decided the time was right to redistribute some of our investment and our focus to the women's game. We were looking at that very closely internally, to ensure that we had sort of diverse representation within the bank. And I was challenged to look at that through the lens of all of our sponsorships as well. And so at that time, the Women's Super League, as it was known then, presented itself as an absolutely brilliant opportunity and an area for us to really make a difference to communities and societies up and down the country. And of course, the scheme that the FA were in the early iterations of the Girls Football Schools partnership, they were looking for someone to support with funding. And we decided to provide that support, and we've been involved ever since. And that was a really good decision, if I do say so myself. They are doing an absolutely fantastic job. You heard me talk about it this morning. We don't do any of the hard work. We support with the funding from a banking perspective, but there's people in this room who work day in, day out to make football available in schools for girls. And for us, that's making such a difference to societies up and down the country. And we always say that if societies prosper where we're present, then we prosper as a firm as well.
I think that at the moment, where we are in the women's game, we're okay. We're okay. Okay is not good enough. Let's get it right. We are okay, and there's bits and bobs of funding coming in and sponsorship, but it's down here, we've got to start right there.
Yeah.
We have to do that. In order to keep this going or make it better, we have to start right at the very bottom, where I was in Leicester at 8, 9, 7, 6, it doesn't matter. Give them the opportunity, give them the space, give them the balls, give them the kits, give them the coaches, and then we'll continue what we're doing now, but we'll make it better because that foundation's stronger. What we've achieved, in my opinion, from what the girls have had, is incredible. from nothing really. Compared to what I had, these girls have had nothing, and look what they've achieved so far. And I'm not just talking about the Lionesses, I'm talking about the girls that have turned pro. That's incredible. For me, at 16, I signed a pink piece of paper. It was pink back in the day. It was at Norwich City. And I signed a contract, 16 years old. I was on £80 a week. That was a lot of money, by the way, back then. I lived in Great Yarmouth, and I spent all 80 quid on the Sunday night, going out in the nightclubs. But I had a professional contract. For the girls to do that, with having no foundations and no real help, is incredible. If we can start to build a proper foundation where they get it from day dot, there's no end. There's no end to what we can achieve.
Yeah.
But we need businesses, foundations, people that are talking about it, saying, yeah, it's great, yeah, we're involved, here's a 6-month contract. Yeah, it's great, yeah. We want proper investment that can just sustain this juggernaut and take it forward. That's what we need to do. There's people out there that, that want to help. We need to get them involved.
Yep.
Sharpish.
Yep. That sustainable growth actually requires many pieces to fit together. And we have a lot of ex-players here. We have a lot of soccer moms and dads who are actually putting their kids through the grassroots system. And everyone has a different story, of course. But I think you're right, there has been progress, but we still have a lot of work to do. So let's go over to Alan. Knock on wood, I don't know if this is wood or not, but your men's and women's teams are doing wonderfully this year. And what is the goal? How are you supporting your women's team? And what is the plan?
So interestingly, when we first came in, it was the first change that we made at the club. We professionalized the women's program and actually brought it into the club. It was being held into the foundation in the community side. We knew that it was something before we'd ever even come, as I mentioned, that we wanted to invest heavily in. But the obstacles to doing it have been interesting all the way through. So we brought them into to the club as a full-blown part of everything that we do. We ran into everything from, well, we can't use the same training ground for X reason, Y reason, you can't use the same locker rooms, you can't use all the facilities. It just seemed like for certainly the first 6 months, it was all the things that we couldn't do. Why can't we do it this way? For those that sat in the session just before this, that you heard Lola, who runs our women's football side. I've known her since she was 15 years old. So when I needed help in understanding, kind of like, okay, what am I running into here? It's the first person that I called and said, okay, tell me about women's football here. Why am I running into these obstacles? What do we have to do? Quickly turned into, okay, we need to hire you. So we brought her in and we started to make change just in the littlest of ways. So it will sound probably very, very minor, but our women's team was being, kicked off of pitches because if the pitch wasn't in good enough condition for the day after, not even for the game that we're going to play on, but if it was going to get torn up for somebody else's, it doesn't matter who they were going to be the next day, it couldn't be used by a women's team. And so we went and tried to cut a couple of deals. I thought that I got a good deal out of a nearby League One team. We were paying, and I'm not paying a small amount, to be able to use their facilities. And after about 4 or 5 games, it was the same thing. It was like, oh, you're too much wear and tear on the facility. So the first thing that we realized is we're gonna have to do this differently than what people are thinking. We're gonna have to actually invest in it differently. So we went and got a long-term contract even for the training facilities. We've started looking at how we build facilities. Again, we don't have all the funding that you think every billionaire, American has, because 1, I'm not a billionaire, and 2, it's a lot harder than people think to run a club that gets relegated, just so you know. We've taken it kind of step by step and looked at how can we make improvements in each one of these areas and influence the direction of where we want to be. Because where do we want to be? We want to be at the highest levels for both of our teams. We're in the process of combining our social media into being just one social media for both our men's and women's. But that didn't come from us. That came from our fan board of asking why we hadn't done it already. And so those are the kinds of cool things that when you start hearing the voices of multiple, portions of your both supporter, fans, and community, that you start to hear what you're missing because you're focused on something else that just hasn't taken you down that path just yet. So when we look at kind of the investment side, we still know that there's a lot more. And as we were talking before, I really do think that you could easily see a licensing process that says, hey, you know what? If you want to be in the Super League or you want to be in any one of the top 3 or 4, you have to dedicate, just to get the license, a certain amount of your total revenues. Now, what that is, that's up for discussion and debate. But you have to take a long-term view of everything that you do, especially in women's sport, or you will not get there. Even though we've accomplished great things, I turn around and look at the disparity between what is invested here versus what we do in America, and it's night and day. And I don't understand it, but I don't understand a lot of things. So we're learning as we kind of go along. But I think we've done a lot so far, but we haven't done nearly enough. And I think that we'll continue to make that progress. The team's doing great. One of the things is we did actually also ask, and when our previous coach, just to be clear, was absolutely a huge supporter. But our current manager absolutely has done a phenomenal job of saying, you are all welcome to learn from our first team, and is bringing that kind of all together as one club, which is, our values and our mantra, one club for all. So we love that. We love that. That means that when we go and actually hire people, that's what we're looking for in that whole process. So that's how we're investing right now. But it's still a struggle. It's not the easiest, especially when your fan base will criticize any money that you put not towards the first team. And every decision that I make that doesn't look like it's going to take us back to the Premier League will get criticized, a million ways to Sunday. Yeah. So it's one step at a time.
You can never make everybody happy, unfortunately. There will always be unhappy fans. It's what your values are. And when you go to bed at night, what makes you feel like you've done a good job.
Absolutely.
That's what's important. Dion, so now that the women's game is being broadcast live, is that really making a big difference, reaching bigger audiences, making the game more visible?
Yeah, it is. It is. I think 17 million watched the final. I think the viewing figures have gone up double since 2017 as well. So, yes, it's making a massive difference, and it's giving the youngsters somebody to watch and to aspire to, and look what they've achieved. So they get to see them visually as well, and they get to see their idols actually with their own eyes rather than just seeing it, as a name written. And I think it inspires the young girls and the young boys as well to want to play the game. I just believe that, as Alan's touched on as well, I mean, Alan's story there, what I got from what Alan was saying there, just that stuck with me was, you can't play on the pitch because somebody else wants to play it the following. That's just a lack of respect, isn't it? It's a lack of respect. It's not. One of my mantras is, find a fault, make a feature. So if you've got a fault, make something of it. And they could have done that for the girls. They could have found a way around it, but there's just these, and we keep coming against these stumbling blocks all the time that nobody's willing to break down and to have a go at. The TV footage of the game, I think, is brilliant. I think the standard of the game has gone up so much. Since I've been at the World Cup, since I was at the World Cup in France, and then I was absolutely gutted because I watched, and I was there, and I was on my mic, and I'm watching the games, and I'm with Jordan Nobbs, I'm with Alex Scott, and I'm watching the game, and the girls are scoring and they're coming over. I'm thinking, this is just incredible. It wasn't for me, it was for them, honestly. And it was just, the stadiums were packed, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, when we get back, our game is going to be incredible. And then the pandemic hit. Yeah. So we're kind of starting from the very beginning. So we're kind of, in my opinion, we're like probably 3 years behind where I think we need to be. But we need to make sure we get back on the horse and keep what we're doing strong. Because if we let this go, because there's something here, there's something big. And Alan said we are way behind. He's seen it with his own eyes in America. We're way behind. Not from what we can see, because what we see at the moment is good, and we're happy with what we see, but there's so much more. In order to challenge, the States and big footballing corporations like the US girls side, we need to start to get some real investment, some funding. And I will not stop saying that, because it's needed.
Yeah. And resource allocation has always been very dear to my heart. It's no different than, having a family with a mom and a dad and a couple kids, boys and girls, and you're saying only the boys can eat the meat, and the girls, you just wait. If there's any left over, maybe we'll give you some as well. I mean, it's not that different, so it really makes me very sad. But the growth, of course, depends on the visibility, on the broadcast revenues, as well as the sponsorship revenues. And maybe over to Tom to tell us a little bit, what do you think it takes to get more brands involved in women's football and sponsoring like you guys?
Yeah, look, I guess to Dion's point, we're not doing a bad job at the moment. And we talked about earlier on, you just have to look at some of the brands on the screen behind here. You look at some of the brands that are associated with the World Cup, with the Euros. There's major brands out there putting major investment into the women's game. So it's a really positive story. The money that we're putting in, we're doing it because it's justified and it's measurable. And in fact, when we started this journey, it wasn't. And I've always said, I was a bit lucky. I had the right support internally. People were willing to take that chance back in 2018, provide the money. I had no business case at all. And it's quite rare for an organisation our size to sign off funding of that quantum without a business case, but they saw the opportunity. So,
what was the opportunity? Why did you do it then? Why if you couldn't see something that was concrete, why did you gamble?
I think we knew it wasn't a gamble to a certain extent. We knew it was absolutely the right thing to do. We are, to Alan's point, we have quite a strong US leadership who had experienced firsthand the growth and the investment in the women's game in the US. So to them, it was to come over here and see what was going on. I guess they saw the opportunity and the vision, right? So we had that. What else did I say? I mean, look, fast forward to today, to that measurement point, I think for brands coming in today, there is the ability to measure it. The broadcasting piece, the eyeballs on it, the growth is so significant. So it makes sense. For us, it makes sense from a brand perspective. It makes sense from a community perspective. We don't, the world is changing around us every day. For us, the ability to use football to be more connected into communities is so valuable because we don't have the branches there. So that football, the role that we're playing, fills some of that physical infrastructure gap that people are so connected to. And it's also starting to make sense commercially in a way that the Premier League always has done for us. There are ways for us to monetize it. There are ways for us to develop and grow the partnership. And that's really positive. And we spend a lot of time talking about that so that we can encourage more brands to get involved and open their wallets.
Keep pushing, man.
I'm trying. But I don't want too many brands involved. That's the problem. So it's always a bit of a...
You'll still be at the top. Don't worry.
No, not if the FA keep putting the price up. Sorry, I will just make one point there. Here's partly the challenge around... I'm only joking. Here's partly the challenge, though. I think there is a balance, and I think Jill touched on it really nicely earlier on when she talked about the building blocks of the game, and it's got to be sustainable. And I think before too many brands pile in and we're out there hunting for them, the product has to be right. The infrastructure has to be right. The product is brilliant. The quality of what you're seeing on the pitch is brilliant. What's happening at grassroots level is brilliant. But we get pissed off when a game gets cancelled because we're a sponsor and I'm handing over money. And it's not happening. We've got to turn clients away at the gate. It's not going on TV. And we understand because it's where the game is and it's on that journey. But when you're in that category of sponsor, whatever it is, you expect what you get back to be delivering. So there's a real fine balance with all of this at the moment as well to make sure you can deliver on what the promises are.
So Tom, do you think there's an argument then, or do we think there's an argument that maybe that in order to try and stop the cancellations, let's talk of WSL for now, that we could play at the main stadiums, maybe? There's going to be less games.
Well, maybe Polly's got a view on that from a Man U perspective.
Polly, what do you think?
I think there's a danger of this Instagram versus reality. I think we see a lot of the glossiness on broadcast, but you lift under the bonnet and there are some shaky foundations. You know, we look at the operating costs of playing in main stadia, and there's not many that will break even, let alone make a profit. So I think we have to be really careful about whether we want to put our investment into that area when there's a whole load of other areas to consider. I think just going on the point you made earlier, Dion, about the timelines. So at Manchester United, the club's 144 years old. The women's section's 4 years old. So there's an awful lot of catch-up to be playing there. But my strategy has never been a copy and paste. It's been an understand, edit, and apply appropriately. And I want to keep that nuance because the women's game is different and it needs some education at times as well. So whether that's educating around sports bras and the fact that they shouldn't just be small, medium and large, but actually boobs are in all different sizes. It might be some education around the pelvic floor, particularly for women coming back after childbirth. The calendar is still a big challenge that we need to lobby FIFA on. It, you know, from a player care perspective, it is not right. So there's a lot of things here that we need to be careful about. We need to tread, you know, really mindfully on. Yes, main stadia can be fantastic, but it can also be quite crippling from a financial perspective as well. So I think this, you know, treading carefully, being sustainable, whilst it sounds a bit boring, that's really the reality of how we need to grow and how we need to develop so that we can maintain some of those USPs around affordable ticket pricing. We want the attendances to be diverse and to grow and to be open to all. Whereas the minute we go like supercharged into professionalism or continued professionalism, that's where we're in danger of a wheel falling off. When I started at Manchester United, there was a strategy to crawl, walk, run, and it feels like we're going from crawl to leg it. Which is fantastic in some elements, with, you know, the raising profile, the attention that the game's getting, you know, with matters like, you know, the England team winning the Euros, Jill, they're winning I'm a Celebrity, the Lionesses cleaning up at Sports Personality, leading stories around the transfer deadline day. They're fantastic, but we do need to make sure that there is continued investment. So Barclays investment, brilliant, but I would urge, you know, other sponsors to make sure that when they are investing, that we're not just slicing the cake differently, but we're adding more layers to the cake and calling those layers out. This layer is for X, whilst the other layer is for Y. So I think that's a way that we can continue to build and be more sustainable so the head doesn't leave the body.
Yeah, you're right.
Along those lines,
Yeah.
one of the things that was mentioned that I had never even thought about, which I thought was super interesting, which we will apply immediately, was that when they take in a sponsor, the sponsor knows that a certain allocation is actually going to the women's program at Man United. Never even thought about that. This is the kind of thing that I think more and more, you know, when the dialogue starts to happen, that, you know, we have no problem. If I take in, you know, £1 million sponsor, knowing that X percent is going when we sold them that sponsorship, when we're delivering on that sponsorship, and then knowing that that's actually being dedicated to, these are the kinds of things that I just, there needs to be more knowledge of this and then implemented, to your point. But at the same time, you know, the fights that we've gotten into over letting anyone onto that first team pitch. Oh my goodness.
The groundsman.
It's like, you know, I went out there after one game to let some kids, you know, take some shots on goal against me, and I thought I was going to get lynched. You know, so I do think there's also just kind of, there's some balance that has to be brought into the system about the way we think about things. Because it's okay to cancel a women's game, but it's not okay to cancel a men's game. I mean, you could probably find a way to play on the same pitch if you had to. It's like, I don't know that there's a lot of compromise made specifically in this sport in this country. It's like there is a way to do it, and if you don't do it that way, you run the risk of getting in a lot of trouble. But I do think there's a lot more compromise we can find.
And those who ask too many questions are not always loved, right?
No.
You know, you just need to go with the flow. Maheta, what do you think are the biggest next challenges for growth of women's football? Where can we hit walls?
Well, first of all, I want to say that if you want to quit Manchester United, we'll take you in the union. I absolutely love what you said, and I completely agree. I think what we're seeing is this Instagram versus reality, and that's what is happening. I think we still see too many players who are called professional, but the reality is that that's not the case. In the way they're treated, in the condition, in what they're paid, that's the reality. And yes, the Instagram is what is told to people. The reality is very different. We still have a situation where, for example, the male players receive a pension contribution that the female just don't, and there's no reason for that other than not making the investment is required. So it is what you described, Polly, very, very, very well. And I think in the bigger picture, what we see is let's make sure that we do not kind of make the mistake of copying what the men have done. Let's learn as to what is working and then try to amend whatever is not working and try to make it better and be a bit more creative in the way that we approach things. And I think the calendar is a good example. We're seeing how disastrous it is when it's not run properly. Why would we just copy that? Why don't we try to a different approach? Commercially the same. Why don't we try to kind of stop this idea of the club being there, the player being there? Why don't we make it our product? No? And then people have a skin in the game, they're motivated, they want to be part of it. So yeah, I agree with the sign on the back of what you said. So no, I think it's encouraging, but I think there's a lot of things to be done still.
Yeah, and maybe a quick word on the transfer system. Yeah. We all know several hundred million goes to men's player transfers at every window, several billion actually. And for women's, it's still around a couple million every year. How do we see that developing, the transfer market?
That's probably a question for my neighbor next door. but I do believe that we're starting to see a change in that as well. I think you see how people give value and importance to women's football. They understand what it can drive in terms of their growth as a club. And I think you'll see some change slowly, but I think we're still kind of far away from what is happening on the men's side. Yeah. But again, it's a question of what importance do you give to those players? How much value do they have to you, and hence how ready do you make that investment to actually grow that section?
Yeah. So talking about investments, actually, this is what we talked about with Alan before the session. I'm sure you have seen that Deloitte has published now for the first time the Women's Money League. And those clubs that have chosen to give information from the men's side, the average revenue is about 2.4 million euros. At the top is Barca with about 7 million. And Manchester United apparently hasn't given the information, but it probably was acquired through their company's house filings or something like that. But on average, the clubs have spent only about 1% or less than 1% of their overall revenues for women's football. So that is a very, very minor amount. So the licensing part that you and I talked about was, what if, the licensing requirement said you need to allocate not 1%, but at least 2% of your budget. So if you took away 1% from the men's side, nothing will happen. The world will not turn upside down, but it will be doubling the women's football budget. So how do you, as an investor, owner, make these budget allocation decisions? Obviously, there are lack of resources, and we understand the game doesn't necessarily make the kind of money that justifies the investment, but how do we break that cycle? We always talk about the financial gap between big countries and small countries, big clubs and small clubs, but within the same club, there is a huge, huge gap between men's and women's side.
So the way we looked at this was slightly different when we came into it versus just the pure financials don't make a lot of sense. I think that most people will agree with that you will not make money off of the women's game for quite some time. So you have to look at it as like, what's your purpose? What are you trying to accomplish? And then how are you going to try and accomplish it? I do think that there are certain things that can be done, like mandating a percentage of revenues as a licensing scheme. I think it's interesting that there's way more teams that would love to be competing at a certain level, whether that be the Super League or the Championship, but the leagues don't necessarily support that from a process today, but there was plenty of opportunity during the pandemic that if you wanted just to apply for the license, you could get it. I just think that we miss a trick if we don't then say, okay, but you have to commit at least this amount of money to do it. But from our perspective, when we walked in, we realized that we were going to be, for a very long time not making money. So it wasn't going to be a budget allocation based off of how much we could make off of the women's game. It didn't take a rocket scientist to go to one of our games to see that we have 100 to 200 people that will actually come to a game. So we're not going to overnight get that to be 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, even if we want it to be. But so we did it. We looked at it differently and said, okay, how do we build an audience? How do we build an audience either with content or with interest and engagement? So we did the first deal with TikTok in women's sport here to broadcast all of our games live. Okay, that immediately got us between 100 and 125,000 viewers on a game-by-game basis. That started to give us at least the credibility to say there is an audience. Not to say that it's in love with Burnley, okay? It's just that there is an audience there, and that we can actually tap into that audience for other things. So the idea from a sponsorship perspective absolutely is fantastic, which I really do believe that we missed a trick here by telling sponsors, look, by getting a portion of it, here's what we can do for you from a content and stuff perspective. So I just think that you have to think about it outside of the box. You can't just say that, hey, it's got to make money and to make it in a certain way, because if that was the case, anybody that follows MLS in the US would understand none of those teams make money, okay? Yet they're worth more than almost every one of the teams in the Premier League, okay? So it's not about the revenue profitability mix. There's other things there, and you've got to tap into that. And so that's what I think you just have to have that mindset of, well, what am I investing in? Am I building something either for the greater good, for the audience, for something? But if it's all about just the economics, it will be a long, long time. Yeah. And it will probably fail many times before it actually succeeds if it's only about the economics.
Yeah. And I guess, as Polly said, it's about adding layers to the cake, but also earmarking what those layers will be. Revenues and resources are scarce. They need to be spent very wisely. Dion, how do you see the future of women's football? Yeah.
Big question.
Psychic.
I'm positive. I'm always positive about it. But as I've said before, I just think we need to stay on the horse and gently get into a canter and really give it some oomph, so to speak, because I don't know, having watched the game for so long now and just seeing the quality of the individual player, technically talking about the way the girls are playing the game, I mean, Polly will tell you better than me, but, the way that the silly thing, the way they're passing the ball, the way they're receiving the ball, the coaching they're getting, the way that they're scoring goals, the goals that they're scoring, the saves that they're making, I think it's just gone to the next level. And I just want to see it progress, and I want to see the stadiums full. I'm a massive fan of trying to get as many people into the stadium as possible. That's why I mentioned, is there a way? Alan said there might be a way. Is there a bit more give and take maybe with the stadium? I understand what you're saying with the cost it is to use one of the men's stadiums. But I just feel that we just have to stay on the horse and just keep going and keep investing and keep believing. And we've had 3 years, and we're 3 years behind, in my opinion, because of the pandemic. So if we all just keep rowing the same way, man, we're going to get there fast.
We will. And Polly, what can organizations like us, like Women in Football, do to help with that growth and help shape that future?
I think women's football, or even football development, there's always going to be a bit of tension between what you want to do and the resources that you've got available to do it. So I think it's important to understand where there's slack, and equally where there's tension between what you'd like to do and what you can do. So I think, anything to support negotiation skills, influencing skills, how and when to ask for your questions, using head and heart rationale, using calibrated questions, those types of influencing skills for me have been absolutely paramount. So I think, because there'll always be that tension between what you'd like to do and what you've got, it's knowing, as I said, when to ask, what to ask, but how to ask.
Great, thank you. And last question to each of our panelists. If you could change one thing that would make a positive difference, what would that be? Maheta.
Put the players at the center of the discussion. Incredibly, they're not the center.
You're
without
right.
players, there's no game. So
Exactly. We could sit 24 hours a day, but no players, no game. Alan, for you, what would that be?
I would love to see some redistribution at some level that rewards clubs or organizations for investing in infrastructure, whether that be separate, unique stadiums or things. Whether you look at it as kind of a building fund or something, but like we look at it as like I can't get people to invest in building a separate stadium for a women's game, and it doesn't make economic sense. But at the same time, the FAs are overstretched. We look at our county stands and stuff. It's just there needs to be some kind of development fund for putting more capital to work that already exists within the ecosystem of football. I don't know how, but I'd love to see that take place because I do believe that if you're playing on better pitches with better resources, you'll get better players, which will then turn into better quality of games, which is then better broadcast. It starts from there. Right. But you need someone either to back it financially or to make grants to make that happen. Not to say that people aren't granting a lot to grassroots and stuff, but I just think if you're going to look at the women's game, the biggest change, if you don't know, in America was changing the regulations at the university level to where you could not have more funding going to men than you did to women. Okay? At the university level, that changed everything from there on out. You're not having to do that at the professional level. You just have to do it somewhere that says, hey, we're willing to spend enough money that we think just as much of everyone, no matter gender or whatever. And so I just think that there's got to be a way somewhere along there that we could get more money into the game.
Yep. And Dion?
Yeah, I would. I just think the grassroots facilities are better, but for me, that's where we have to start. More grassroots facilities in more areas around the country. That's what I would say.
Tom?
Yeah, same. For me, it's about football in schools. So we want every school to offer football, and obviously there's lots of work going on there. But I talked about this morning how great it was last week that 285,000 girls played football in a break time or after school, right, and got to experience it. But we shouldn't have to be doing that, right? We are because we are where we are, but actually they should be playing football. They should be choosing football over. No, I'm not going to compare it to something else. I'll get to. But you know what I'm going to say, right? It should be on the curriculum. Girls should have the opportunity to play, and that's what we've got to fix alongside the grassroots. And I think that's where the real change starts to happen.
And Polly?
I was going to say all of those.
Sorry.
Joking. No. I totally agree with the investment in grassroots, particularly the infrastructure. I think a slightly different answer is keeping that hybrid approach of the broadcast and keeping women's football on free to air so that it's accessible for men, women, boys and girls to watch. Because at the moment, unless it's in a major international tournament for men's football, actually women's football now with the Women's Super League is a regular appointment to view on the BBC. So having that hybrid approach between free to air and pay TV is, I think, really important that we keep for visibility and awareness.
Sorry, can I have one more thing? The other thing you need, today's been so inspiring to meet so many of the people in the room, and so what we also need more of is the work that you're doing at WIF. And I don't say that just because you're sat there. It is inspiring to meet all these people in the room who are making a difference day in, day out. That's where it happens. Yes, you need people like us, voices, sponsors, but without the people on the ground doing the jobs, making the difference, none of this is going to happen. And for me, that's probably the single biggest thing. If you went back 5-10 years, you did not have a room full of people like this, or at least there wasn't a way to convene them all and bring them together. Yep. And that is incredibly powerful.
Yep.
Great. Yeah,